The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
At that time, Jesus came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many who heard him were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household." And he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went about among the villages teaching. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In my own experience as a priest, my dear friends, one of the most disappointing dimension of the priestly ministry is when we are with people who go through massive rejections in their life. I remember some months ago, there was this man who was married and had 2 children. They are grown-up 2 children. And his wife died of a terminal illness. And I saw with my own eyes how he took care of her, because I used to take care of that lady when she was in hospital. And the father, as a husband, he was so committed. And then he had these 2 children who, for some reason or the other, have decided to leave him alone, left their house, and it's impossible for him to now even to take a call. So he was telling me, "Father, I as a husband was responsible for my family. Of course, I did what I can. There were all kinds of weaknesses on my part, mistakes, naturally. But then, now I have these 2 children only, and they are rejecting me." So in fact, he was telling me, it feels sometimes when I think of it, I can just kill myself. So, as a third party, I listened to the story and I realized how painful it is and how difficult it is for a man or a woman to go through rejections. It can happen in your life, my dear friends, in my life, that we journey through life, we do things for other people, for our friends, relatives, colleagues, whoever, and then later on they turn against you and reject you completely. How do we face them? And how are we to deal with rejections? Now, if you talk about the priests, when we meet on Mondays, we sometimes talk to each other, and then most of the time, priests who go through difficulties in their parishes, they say, "Because the parishioners are against me, writing letters against me, doing this and that and the other," and they almost say, "I feel like leaving the whole thing. Why should I go through rejections from people when I'm trying to do something for God and for people themselves?" So, rejections are always difficult, painful, and challenging. The liturgy of the word today brings us to a profound reflection on how to deal with rejections and what are we to do when we have them in life. The first reading taken from the book of prophet Ezekiel, who happens to be one of the main prophets in the Old Testament, was, as the reading goes, was inspired by God to talk to his own people when they were in Babylonian exile. Go and tell them, God says to him from within, and tell them that I want them to return to me. But then the voice that spoke to him says, as it is recorded, thus says the Lord God, and whether they hear or refuse to hear, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that a prophet has been among them. Now it's interesting that even God, when inspiring Ezekiel to go and talk to people, he tells him, you go and tell them, but then again, they may listen or they may reject you. It can happen either way. But remember, even if they reject you, one day they will remember that God was talking to them through you. So in a way, what the first reading tells us is that rejections can always come our way. It can happen that you, as a parent, you bring up your children and make them grow up, do well in life, educate them, and eventually they can reject you. It can happen, it may not happen. But if it does happen, as Ezekiel was told, we need to remember it's part and parcel of life. So when you read the first reading further on the text, what Ezekiel was taught is that you take it positively. Rejections can come, and if you realize that you have done what you got to do, one day they will realize how they have failed in responding to you. When talking about rejections, my dear friends, if you ever read about the life story of Immanuel Kant, a great philosopher, they say that he was one of the groundbreakers of philosophical thinking. But he happened to be a man who was kind of a recluse, and he was not a social person. So in the life story, you realize that he fell in love with a girl in the neighborhood who was a beautiful thing, and then he was shy to go and talk to her. But so it took him a long time to engage this girl in conversation and befriend her and talk to her. And after a long time, with two of his friends, he wanted to somehow propose to this girl. So what he did was, the two friends accompanied him. He went to a place and knelt down before her and proposed to her. And then she rejected him completely. No, get lost. I'm not interested. You may be a philosopher, but I don't want you. Get lost. So Immanuel Kant was rejected in the best way possible as a young man. But then a day later, his two friends who were concerned about the guy, because it was a painful experience for him, so they knew that he was having this struggle, trying to befriend this girl, do things for this girl, and then now he was flatly rejected. So the following day, when the two friends went, he was kind of all right. He was back in his normal activity. There was no look of sadness as it happened at that moment. The two friends were kind of surprised. They asked him, how is it that you are all right now? We thought that you will be depressed and not able to deal with this. Then he came out with a beautiful answer. He said, I have lost a friend who never loved me. I have lost a friend who never loved me. But she has lost a friend who loved her dearly. So the loser is not necessarily myself, it's her. So the the attitude of Immanuel Kant is a reflection of what Ezekiel had. Yes, I am there for you. I'll do what I can. You can reject me. Yes, of course, it's your choice. But then, as long as I do what I have been called to do and what I do according to my conscience, one day you will know what I have been for you. So therefore, my dear friends, when rejections happen, as Ezekiel explains, and the life story of Ezekiel tells us, be positive about it. It is something that's going to happen in life. That's why in the Catholic theology there is a saying that when rejections happen, always remember that it is not the end of your life. It's not fatal. But it is just that it is the opinion of another. When you are rejected, when you are humiliated, it's because it's somebody else's opinion, not yours, not everyone's opinion. Be strong as long as you do what you got to do. The second reading, taken from the letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, refers to another form of rejection that Paul went through. Of course, this was so many centuries after. Paul himself was now in his own missionary zeal. He was going from place to place, and it was a time where Paul had massive revelations about God. In fact, when you read the scriptures, you can see that Paul was a Jew who was against Christianity, but then he joined the entire mission of Peter and the others, and he became one of those who had a very strong connection to God, as it were. For example, he was the one who was able to see the Last Supper and write about it, though he was not there. So he talks about how he was being chosen by God to be a tremendously powerful apostle. But then he talks about something that he felt God was rejecting him as well. He says, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited, that it should leave me. And 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Now it's another experience of rejection for Paul, from whom? From God himself. He was blessed in so many ways, but he's now going through a difficult situation. He doesn't specify what this was, but it refers to maybe a sickness or physical disability. Scripture scholars say maybe a problem that he had with the others, or his anger, maybe, whatever. But then sometimes it happens that even God rejects you. So here Paul, in a way, sees this rejection by God again positively. He says, in my weakness, I become closer to God. In my rejection of my asking prayer through prayers, it makes me realize, to understand why God is rejecting me, not giving me what I'm asking for. In your life and in my life also, my dear friends, sometimes rejections happen from people, from God, from your own brother, your sister, your father, your mother, your friend, your colleague. People can reject you. And it is painful, of course. But then it can become a moment for redirection, as it were. Paul realized that there is no point just wallowing in my rejection, but find meaning and move on with what I have got to do. As long as I do what is correct, whether I receive the benefits or whether I receive the privileges or not, let me do them anyway, because sometimes rejections are good, because it makes you realize your own self, and find new ways of living, new ways of understanding, new ways of responding to situations. Rejections are not fatal. They are always moments for redirection, as it were. And when you come to the gospel passage today, again it is the experience of Jesus where Jesus was rejected by his own people. And the message here is that Jesus knew that his own brothers and sisters, his cousins, people from his own village were talking all kinds of things about him. You know, we all can sometimes feel rejected today because it can happen that someone in your own family or your own brother, your sister, they say things and try to destroy your good name or do something that is evil that you least expected. How do we deal with this? Now, in the story here, what you can see is Jesus looks at it and understands it and makes sense of it. But then the author says, and he went about among the villagers teaching. Rejections can happen. Yes, they will. Can happen from your own family, your own brother, sister. It can destroy you. But then, as long as I know what I am doing is right and worthy, let me go on doing what I got to do. There is an interesting story about Winston Churchill, who was leading the British government during the Second World War. And it is said that at that time of his life, he had rejections from the world, the other people, enemies, abroad and on the ground with his own people. And he was invited to be the chief guest at the prize distribution when he was the prime minister, towards the end of his career. So they say he was going through a lot, going through these rejections at all kinds of different levels. He went to the school, he was sat there. When he was asked to address the children, he went up to the podium, held it tight, and he said, "Children, I have one important message for all of you. Never, ever give up when people reject you. Never, ever give up when people reject you, because it will only show your character." And he went and sat down. They say it was one of the greatest speeches that Winston Churchill had made. Ezekiel went through rejection. He went on doing what he had to do. He was rejected. Paul experienced rejection by God himself, but he went on doing what he believed is right. Jesus also went on doing what he had to do in spite of rejections, because rejections are inevitable, but the journey has to always go on.